Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic. Basically, the show is myself and Andrew talking about D&D because we're old and we know a lot about it, sort of. Although this episode will prove that I know very little. But today we're talking about spellcasting, and of course, don't forget this podcast is brought to you by Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com, where you can go there and buy everything. Because if you don't, you're weird. Uh, I think I introduced Andrew. I'm Shane, and hi, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
By the way, just full disclosure, it's taken us about 40 minutes to get this going because computers were not our friends. But now we're here.
Is that
So,
because we got our first snow of the season and the city's not used to it?
to be honest, that is very, very true. Although out where you are, it's
Mm,
probably picturesque to like the nth
yes.
degree.
Yeah, we're supposed to get quite a lot tonight. Yeah, I think even maybe 15 centimeters. It was going to be 25 or 30. They've now forecast that as a bit less, but I think there's going to be quite a bit. There's quite a lot. There's some snow now.
Oh yeah, it's accumulating here. I mean, I'm right at sea level. I'm not sure how much higher you are, but definitely, it's going to be an adventure because, as always, with people on the West Coast, there's a great political cartoon out of the Times Colonist, Victoria Today, uh, and basically it was one tiny flake hitting the highway,
Yeah.
and the cars driving back and forth just off they went.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, spellcasting. Now, as I said, spellcasting is not my strength. I tend to be more of a brute sort of character roller. But educate us all.
Well, we talk often about how this game is not as complicated as some people might tell you. Some spell casting is quite simple, and others there is a bit more to it, especially if you're a wizard at a higher level.
Right.
So, but it's not that complicated. So, um, this is using magic, using spells, and the game actually started at the beginning of D&D in the 70s with clerics. A druid was a subclass of a cleric, a wizard and an illusionist was a subclass of a wizard. Those were the only true casters. Now that includes clerics, druids, sorcerers, wizards, and warlocks. Personally, I think they should be the only classes with spells, as I've mentioned before,
Yeah, you
because
have.
now bards, paladins, rangers, fighters, if you're an eldritch knight, rogues, if you're an arcane trickster, and even monks, if you choose the way of the four elements, they all have some magic. Um, in our Monsters of the Wilderness book, we introduce a ranger subclass that has no magic, and I'm definitely toying with the idea of taking magic away. Maybe not all of the mechanics of what these classes can do magically, but take away the spell casting. Um, so how does it work? Well, spells have power levels, but these do not correspond to the class level. So a ninth level wizard cannot cast a ninth level spell. Ninth level is the highest level of spells, and I think you have to be about 17th level to get one of those.
Right.
They work in three ways. You can either there's some spells that are basically a spell melee attack, like the commonly used Firebolt or Ray of Frost. You roll a d20 to see if it hits. Um, Many spells, the target of the spell has to make a saving throw to fight off the spell. And the third way, some spells just happen. There's nothing you can do about it. It just happens. Like the sleep spell, you can't. The only way you can fight against it is if you have enough hit points to ward it off. If you don't, you
Right.
just fall asleep. Um, So with melee attacks, you roll a d20, you add your spell casting modifier. So if you're a wizard, that's your intelligence modifier. And then you
Right.
add your proficiency bonus. And saving throws, your spell has a difficulty level, and that equals 8 plus your spell casting ability modifier. plus your proficiency bonus. So at the beginning, a wizard who has 18 intelligence, that modifier would be 4, plus your proficiency bonus is 2, so that's 6. Add that to 8. Your initial difficulty for your spells is 14, your DC. Spells can and usually take an entire action. Some of them also have concentration, so you have to keep concentrating on the spell, which means you can't cast another spell with concentration. And if you take too much damage or you're incapacitated or killed, the spell ends. And at the same time, you can still move around and you can still cast other spells and attack. There's a few things you can't do if you're concentrating. Some spells, and now this is where a lot of people get confused. This is one little tricky part of D&D. So some spells can be a bonus action. So 90% of the time, if you're not a sorcerer using a special ability, or if you are multi-classed, if you use a bonus action spell, your action has to be a cantrip spell. So cantrips are basic spells we'll mention in a minute that are not as complex and not as powerful, and you just automatically know these spells. So if your spell that you're using and it's a special spell that is a bonus action, so that means it doesn't take a full action. Your full action, if you're going to cast another spell, it has to be a cantrip. There are some circumstances where that's not true, but 98% of the time, this is the way it works. So normally, for example, you can't cast, for example, some spell that's a bonus action spell and then cast a fireball, because that fireball takes a full action and it's not a cantrip spell. And this is a mistake a lot of people make. They don't read the fine print. And that other spell, the action can only be a cantrip.
That is the thing that I always get. You're right. I get lost on, because if I catch that the spell is a bonus action, then it's easier to deal with. But if I run into whether a spell has to have a roll bound with it, that's where I start to go, yeah, right, okay. What's my DC again? That's actually one of the worst things that I think in managing my character sheets is that I'll update everything.
Right.
But if there's a spell list or a spell, anything spells related, I will forget to update that information. Right. Because just of the way I tend to play. So.
Yeah, like I said, spellcasting is the one part of the game that you've got to read the fine print a little bit in the rules. So most spells happen immediately. Some take longer, especially some spells take longer to cast, called rituals. Those are special circumstances. Spells use up spell slots, and each class level has an amount of spell slots that you can use. However, cantrips are more simple, basic spells, not as powerful, especially at the beginning. And you just know those. The caster just knows cantrips, and you can cast them whenever you want. You never run out of cantrips. But you can run out of spell slots, and then you can't cast spells anymore. So this is an important thing to think about when you're playing in the game, to be in the tactics of the game. If, for example, it's the beginning of the adventure and you've encountered a couple of goblins and they are attacking a party, you might not want to break out your powerful spells at that point. You might want to save your good spells for tough opponents and not use up all your spells on a minor attack. All classes regain spell slots with long rests and some with short rest. Mainly, I think just the Warlock is the only one who regains it with short rests.
Right.
Some casters can use a foci if they want, like a focus. They can use a spell book or an orb or a wand or different things. but this is considered an option. Although personally, I like the idea of that you have to do it, that you have to have these things. There is a process for wizards using their spell book of buying spells and writing them in. I actually that's one of the few things I don't follow the rules with, because I think it slows the game down too much.
I would say that, I mean, for me especially, where if I am picking spells that even I'm familiar with, like I know what it does, but when it gets into the nitty gritty of like, oh, okay, I'm gonna cast. Oh wait, can I cast that at that point? Like, what kind of spell? I don't actually know what the type of spell, or if it's a ritual or not, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like cantrips, yeah, Spider-Man, throwing webs out there. But when you actually need something to really make an impact on what's going on, then yeah, I have to look it up almost every time. I know that there's like spell cards, things like that are quite helpful. Where if you've got your character and you have your list of spells, then you
Mm-hmm.
just take out those cards and you can use those. That kind of makes it a bit easier. I don't have those. I probably should get some. But essentially, you've got all of these little bits of information where when you cast this spell, this happens. However, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And I find that gets more difficult as time goes on, especially when you're getting up to the higher levels. The spells are a bit more intricate, even
Yeah.
though they can do a lot of damage or they can do a lot of healing or whatever it is. Uh, but although I have to admit, my favorite spell by far, Wall of something, like Wall of Thorns, Wall of Ice, Wall of
Yeah.
Fire, because I think that for me is that there's times where it's like, yes, we'd like to fight these creatures, but if you get to a certain point where people get downed or people are really low in hit points, throwing up a wall and just booking it is not a bad strategy, especially when you don't want to deal with somebody who dies, uh, because of they just got pummeled too much and things like that. So, but yeah, there's just so much to remember that I think get the cards. I think that's really the whole summary of this entire point. Get the cards. It'll help you in so many situations where you're not actively slowing down the action at the table. Uh, because it just sucks where it's like, yeah, I'm that guy. I got the book out. Okay, I'm looking for the thing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what page it's on. I'm sorry. You just kind of feel like a bit of a jerk. But, what can you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of props aren't practical. They're interesting ideas for the game, but at a table, most people don't have a big space to play. And you've got your sheet and your pencil and everything, and but I do agree. I think the spell cards are quite useful, and we always talk about how you can play the game without spending a lot of money, and you can use the free rules. But in practical terms, if you have a lot of spells, it's much easier if you have the player's handbook, because most players
Yeah.
have to look up their spell a little bit. Once you play more and more, you get to know them, obviously. But it's very useful to have the player's handbook if you have a lot of spells for your character.
Yeah.
Um, there are three parts to the spell. This is also not always really focused in on. So there's the verbal. So if there's a verbal component, the spells don't have to have all three of these. But if there's a verbal component, if your caster can't talk for some reason, they can't cast the spell. Same with the somatic, so moving your arms around basically for the most part. If they're bound or something, then they can't cast the spell. And then there's the material side, which is the components. So your player should have a container where basic components are kept, like a component pouch on their belt. But if the component has a cost on it in the player's handbook, if it's it says a diamond that's worth 1,000 gold, then you have to have that 1,000 gold diamond, a
Yeah.
diamond worth that much. Otherwise, you can't cast the spell. And I think that actually makes it more interesting and realistic. And you can even do quests like in Skyrim, for example, where you have to go find an ingredient to cast a spell. Um, there's 8 schools of magic overall. These are very important to wizards. It's not really focused in on for other classes, but there's abjuration, which is basically warding off the spells that ward things off for the most part. Conjuration, where you're conjuring something. Divination, this is more in the cleric domain, from getting help from a deity or that sort of power, or having the ability to tell the future or what's going to happen. Evocation, that's like attack magic, war magic. That's the one most people like. That's fireballs and lightning bolts. Enchantment, so you're enchanting an item. Illusion, self-explanatory. Necromancy, so you're draining life from something to give energy to something else. So, creating an undead creature, bringing a creature back to life, Frankenstein style. Transmutation, you're changing one thing from one thing to another. Then class specifics, there are some little details. We won't go through all of the little nitty gritty, but in general, for clerics, the gods grant their power. Divine magic flows through them. And what they have is a list of spells in the player's handbook, and you prepare the spells that you can use for a day or until you get your next long rest from that entire list.
Right.
You can use a holy symbol as your focus, and each subclass gives you extra spells as well. And those are always prepared. You don't have to prepare those, but they use up spell slots. Druids gain magical power from nature or a nature deity. They also prepare a list similar to the cleric, and they change it. They can change that when they do a long rest, like a cleric. They can use a druidic focus like mistletoe or staff or something like that. And their circles, their subclasses give them extra powers, extra spells, and those are always prepared as well. So you don't have to, they use spell slots, but you don't have to prepare them. So those are similar, cleric and druid. Sorcerer, and we're just going to talk about the main casters right now. Sorcerer, magic is just a part of who they are. It infuses their entire being, and they just know their spells. They don't have to prepare them, but they have only a limited amount, and it tells you in the rules how many you can know. And they have sorcery points, which can be used to create different effects. They can also expend spell slots to get sorcery points. And they can use meta magic to twist their magic. The best example is where you can twist your spell, an attack spell, so it actually misses everybody in your party, but just hits the enemy.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, I like the idea that that's tied to sorcerer. There's some new rules giving that to other classes. I think it's great just to keep it with the sorcerers.
Yeah, I agree.
Warlocks are very different. They get their magic from a patron, like a powerful orc fae or a devil or a demon. They don't have very many spells. You have a slot level, and you can cast a spell of that slot level or lower. So as you increase in level, you increase in what your slot level is. And you can have, but you don't know that many spells. The number is very limited. But you regain spell slots when you do a short rest, all your slots. The problem with this mechanically is that most games, and we've mentioned this before, you don't have a lot of short rests. Yeah. So what usually is going to happen is most sessions, there's going to be maybe one long rest, and then and all the casters get their spells back, including the warlock. But the problem is the warlocks have so few spells. So unless you have a game that has long rest or short rest kind of built in or happening consistently, it affects the warlock more because they have so few spells.
I think I've run into that once because I think one of my characters was a warlock sometime last year. And yeah, I ran out of spells all the time, and basically became like I would cast that
Yeah,
at you, but right now I will hit you with my mace or whatever I had.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, they do get a few extra abilities, like extra features. So they have a packed boon, a special power. And there's 3 versions, I believe. Their subclass gives them some extra spells. Again, your spell slots don't increase though. And you have these powers called Eldritch Invocations. So this is really trying to balance off the fact they don't have those other spells. And some of those
right,
are cool. Many of them need a prerequisite to cast before you can do it. Um, and then they can also use an arcane focus like a wand or something for their spells. Wizard, the traditional caster, they study their magic and they keep their spells in a spell book. They can copy wizard spells if they find them on a scroll or from another person's spell book into the book. But that's where you get to prepare your list of spells from this book. And you can change that list when you get a long rest.
right.
Um, they can use an arcane focus like a warlock. That could be a wand, or their spell book, I believe, can be a focus too. When they get to second level, they choose an arcane tradition, which ties into those 8 schools of magic, those 8 types of magic. And those are the subclasses of the wizard in the core book. So there's a few differences with other classes that have spells, like the bard. Um, you you basically know your spells, and then you have a certain amount of spell slots. And yeah, there's a few little tweaks because as we said before, in 5th edition, bards, paladins, rangers, some monks, some fighters, some rogues, um, they all get magic to a certain degree, but it's not as big of a deal overall because they don't have, spell casting is not the majority, the main task that they're doing, the main
Right.
feature of their class, where those main casters, those real casters, that's mostly what you're doing.
And like with all those changes coming, or the potential changes anyway,
Yeah.
for one D&D, um, now those to me are just they're blanketing all the classes. I think is that how it's being done or being suggested anyway?
Yeah, I think they're going to try to simplify it, which in general, 5th edition has had that kind of theme. But in this case, I think it's actually better to have something more connected to the class to give it some definition. I
Yeah.
believe what they're going to do is they have spells now. They're not going to have class lists of spells. They're going to have one overall list called divination, one called primal, and one
Oh, right,
called
right,
arcane.
right.
Three general spell lists. And then they'll probably say, okay, wizards, you can choose spells from the arcane list, and clerics, obviously, divination spell list, divine spells, and then sorcerers, I would believe, would be primal, probably druids too. I'd have to double check that, but I think they're going to have those 3. That's the idea, to have these 3 general spell lists. And then they do want to make a switch too, I believe, in how the classes prepare spells.
Right.
I think the wizard, they're probably going to leave alone, I think, because that's very unique how they have their spells in their book. I don't think they could really change that. I don't think that would be smart. Um, I think you could do a lot better with the warlock. The warlock is the one class overall. Mechanically, I don't think it works that well. And being a fan of alignment and good characters being the main characters, I think a warlock is a pretty good NPC, but unless the player makes an interesting character, I don't see how a warlock is really a hero usually. You could make an
Yeah.
interesting, you could do it, but most of the warlocks I see are evil.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that because of where they gain their power from, I
Yep.
mean, by default, they're kind of bad. But I mean, yeah,
Usually, because they're a servant to something much greater. And, devils and demons are evil.
yeah.
And a lot of Archfey are too. There are good Archfey, but even a good Archfey is going to
As
be,
we noted in your book.
yeah, good Archfey might be a handful. Definitely a chaotic neutral or evil Archfey is going to be a disaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, it blows up in your face so quickly because you have all of these things you have to rely on that are out of your control. So if you have a character that's got all of these,
Yeah,
I have all these spells and they're really powerful and great. But I mean, you could have the DM go, you know what, that thing you just did, or they did yesterday or the
yeah,
last session, that pissed off your patron. And your patron is like, yeah, so all those spell slots I gave you? Yeah, you only have half of them now.
yeah,
Oh, and you can't have this spell, that spell, and that spell. I mean, you could actually play that really, really in some really interesting ways because you could have all of these, benefits that you've been used to just stripped away from you for no reason other than, if the character decided to do something that naturally their patron would be like, no, I think that's actually very interesting. It could make for some very, very uh, impactful game paths anyway.
yeah. It could work well. I think if it's an evil character, I don't think it works that well. Again, I think evil characters break the game.
Yeah,
The idea of a group of heroes working together, that's the way that mechanically the whole game is built. That's how the everything is built around. It's to a certain degree, it's the same issue as splitting the party. That's fine
yeah.
temporarily, but if you do it very long, that's not how the game is built. Um, and that's
And also, no matter what level of character you are, and if you run off to go do your own thing, the DM is going to railroad you back into, they'll let you play for a while mainly, and but they'll definitely get you back. But I think there was a situation where one of my characters, I think, was separated from the party. I've forgotten why, and I think jumped off of a cliff or something to get into some body of water where everyone else
yes,
was,
yes, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I
And you
mean that
just
worked.
survive.
And but definitely, yeah, the character was like not healthy at all at that point because
No,
the whole idea, the way that the game is designed, you have these challenging foes that are meant to sort of you have to have hopefully somebody with healing, you have to have somebody with some sort of you know uh, power
yeah,
to be able to stab you, but um, there's going to be situations where if you run off and do those things, and especially if a wizard runs off and runs out of spell slots, they're
yeah.
screwed.
Oh, yeah. Well, also, from a storytelling perspective, you know, for everybody at the table, whether it's virtual or not,
Yeah,
the whole point is to have the group together telling a story with their characters together. So as soon as somebody's not there, it's like you're at a play, and then all of a sudden they open another wing on the stage on the far left-hand side of the stage, pull back the curtain, and they're like, "Oh, there's this other scene going on here." At the same time as the play is on the main stage, it's very chaotic, and it can be fine short term, and it can be a really cool part of the story. But that was fun when your character did that, but he did just barely survive it.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's a temporary thing, and it's the same thing with evil characters. Temporarily, very temporarily, it can work, but there's no reason for that evil PC, especially a warlock, to work together with this group for the betterment of the kingdom or the party, or um, maybe here and there, but not consistently. And why wouldn't they? Any chance they have to to help themselves, they're going to take. And that's not for the benefit of the adventuring party.
Stab, stab, stab. Cast. Sorry, what was that? Oh, I
Yeah.
shouldn't. Oh, okay. Yeah. Screw you guys.
Like
Yeah, I'm
the
just gonna watch.
the first big bad evil guy you meet, why wouldn't they just, make a deal with them? Right?
I mean, storytelling wise, that is kind of interesting, though. But it can only happen once because it's
It
like,
is,
yeah.
but then that
So,
that
guys,
player is now a non-player character.
exactly. It's like I'm gonna be joining
Yeah.
up. Although you could pre-plan that where a character, like the player, already has another character in
Yeah.
mind to come in, and it's just like this big, huge thing that. Oh yeah, by the way, yeah, this guy, I called him earlier,
Yeah.
and we planned that you
You
guys are
could
going to
do
be in the
that.
dungeon now.
Yeah. Yeah, you could do that, or you could a player who wants to change characters. I've had that before. Somebody tell
Yeah,
me, okay, my character's just gonna sacrifice themselves because I want to do something different. And that's fine because that's something interesting you can write into the story. So
exactly.
yeah. I think spellcasting, as we've been talking about today, there are little few little tweaks. I think Warlock has issues mechanically. That's why I keep bringing it up,
Yeah,
the way it's being designed. But the others are pretty solid and it's not super complicated. And I do like some of you don't want to have a game that's just, super simple and has no complexity to it, because these little details for the classes and for spell casting actually make the game fun. And that's the whole point in playing.
well, exactly. It's like any game. There's a strategy to playing, and I remember many years ago there was a video game called Descent, and basically you were like a spaceship that flew through tunnels and all kinds of stuff. But the reason I brought that up is that I had a friend back then who was so into that game, they wrote a manual, like this huge thick manual. They printed off on their dot matrix printer to describe to people how they could play the game better, and got a publishing deal at some point after that. But it was interesting to read it because there were so many little details in there, like, oh right, I could do that, or I could oh, that's actually
Mhm.
fat. And it changed the way that I played. I mean, I didn't play it a lot, but it definitely, opening up a new game, it's like, oh, actually I could do this instead. And these kinds of details in spellcasting, uh I mean, the game in general, I mean, are so, they're easy, but you also have to pay attention because,
Mhm.
like you and I have talked about in the past about backgrounds and classes and stuff, there are all these little tiny details that make the game more interesting. Sure, you have to remember something, and you gotta, like, do a few things that are going to, take a bit of concentration as a
Mhm.
player, but it makes it all that more sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like fleshed out, like there's details in the world that you can
Yeah, it
you
has
can
more
take into
depth.
account. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and at the same time, I started playing when I was 9 and we had a blast, and we did not play by all the rules correctly all the time. We didn't understand everything. We missed things in the text, and first edition was much more complicated and not mechanically smooth.
Yeah,
And we still had a blast. And there are things now I look back and I'm like, oh, we weren't doing that right, but we still had fun. And that's why, the core of the game is so good and so much fun that you don't need to make sure you do all these little details.
yeah.
It's about having fun with your friends at the table. It's not about making sure that you're doing every little thing right.
That's so true, and that's the brilliant part about having somebody running the game, because if you have somebody who's open and wants to, like, play with stuff and be able to kind of like tell stories in a different way,
Mhm,
um that again makes it, because if you have a problem with a spell, you could be like, "Ah, I don't like the spell, or I don't like the way."
mhm.
You can always talk to the guy running the game or the gal running the game and be like, "Hey, I don't like the way this part works."
Yeah.
And here's my 5 reasons of why. And the person running the game could be like, actually, yeah, that I like that better. Let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Or how about just all that kind of flexibility to make it fun. And
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's just a game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought next time we might do a few shows or have some shows. There's a number of shows where they do their top favorite items on spells and
Oh, totally.
different things. I thought it'd be interesting to look at magic items next time and get a list of together. You and I will uh, come up with a list of magic items that we really enjoy and maybe ones that are not as well known. And
Oh, totally.
I mean, even if we have 10 of those and we spend 5 minutes on each of them, that's usually our show right there. So maybe
Exactly.
we'll
We
just do
try to
10.
keep it tight. Our
Yeah,
show never has issues ever.
no. Always 30 to 50 minutes.
Exactly. Because I mean that's the thing, right? Is that like the spells, there are all these details we could get into the nitty gritty on. Um, but like this episode, we're like spells have to. We're going to talk about the baseline of how spells should work, and then there's so many high level spells and even some simple ones down at the cantrip level that get ignored because they have a rich detail to them that like it took me I think at the first time what was it the something ray which is a can be a cantrip at some level
The Ray
but
of Frost
no I can't remember
or Ray of Enfeeblement. It's not a cantrip, I don't
it might
think. No.
be well there's one that's a cantrip that's actually very powerful if you use it at the right time and
Yeah.
I can't remember which one I'm thinking of but there's definitely times where I forget I even had it and it's like
Right.
oh I cast that thing instead of the thing I could have cast 25 times
Right.
rather than
Right.
the one time that
Yeah.
made no it kind of make a difference for about a minute and a half and then after that the villain healed themselves or whatever
Yeah.
but yeah it could
Yeah,
be
we could do a show the next one I think on magic items and maybe the one after that on spells. And like you say, today we just skim the surface and we can look with a little more detail when we do the spell show.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for listening. Definitely everything that we've talked to, Andrew will place down in the thing down below and stuff like that. So, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you want us to talk about certain things, we are on Twitter, which again is all down there, and let us know what kinds of things that we probably should talk about. And if you have sponsorship deals for us, like we want like at least $500,000 an episode. Hit us up as well on Twitter. But thank you all for watching, listening, and we appreciate all the comments. And we'll see you guys next time.
Later.
Thanks.